We reject the ideology of globalism, and we embrace the doctrine of patriotism.
Not only will this tax plan pay for itself, but it will pay down debt.
There are moral and legal obligation questions that I think we'll have to wrestle with as a society.
When we as people go wobbly on the truth, we go wobbly on America.
All you have to do is look at the numbers, look at what we've done.
And this is only the beginning.
What's good, everyone? You're tuned in to 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. My name's Jason Taylor, host of Evidence of Design. We're also joined on the phone, good friends and co-hosts at Treadwell.
Hey, what's up?
And Yam Lawrence.
Hey, that's my alternate name.
We just played a really fun game where we had to decide what one letter we would remove from our first names.
And what would yours be, John?
I would remove the N, so it'd actually just be Jasso. You know how your parents might have told you, like, well, back in my day, before we had, Nintendos, I would go out and play stickball or whatever. We have the luxury of being able to tell tomorrow's youth that back in the pandemic, we played games like these.
Jason, we're not gonna have kids.
Yeah. We're certainly not going to have kids. Like
there's no generation after ours.
Not only would it would be a disservice to the planet to have more progeny, based off of us. But yeah. I mean, we have to sort of tackle climate change and all that other stuff. So this is all theoretical, but fun games. But hey, it's not all fun and games. Look at that transition, because we got to talk about some stuff on today's episode. It is first airing on Saturday, February 6th, but we are pre-recording the show on Thursday, February 4th. So by the time you hear this episode, some things might have changed, but maybe not all that much, because, sometimes in Evidence of Design, we zoom out, look at broad stuff. Sometimes we zoom in, look at more local stuff. Today, we are zooming in. Normally on the show, we critique income and wealth inequality. We think there is way too much economic inequality in society. We investigate its causes, critique its effects, and propose what we can do to make a more just and equitable society. Past couple weeks, we've been looking at broad national themes. Around 5 episodes ago, we talked about a report being worked on locally by the Police Accountability Board and others in regards to police reform. This was in response to an executive order by Governor Cuomo mandating basically all police departments or all communities across the state to come up with reforms to their police departments in response to what has now been, at least thankfully widely acknowledged by most folks, to be, a need for restructured policing. So around 5 weeks ago, we covered that. On today's show, we're going to cover another recent development with the Rochester Police Department, and that has gotten not just local news, but also captured nationally, where the RPD handcuffed and pepper sprayed a 9-year-old girl. It's disturbing video. We're not going to really watch or listen to it here. Just kind of want to throw that out there because it might be disturbing to some, but we'll get to that later on in the show, talking about the RPD again. But we're also going to look at the top stories locally in Rochester over the past year. I couldn't believe, thinking back to some of our top stories here in our town and being like, wow, that seems like it was ages ago. And also I forgot about this, I forgot about that. We're going to cover kind of the top stories in the past year in Rochester politics. Normally we'd invite you to call in, but we can't, because we're pre-recorded, so just hang tight with us. You can always correspond with us throughout the week at our Radio EOD Gmail, or on Facebook or Twitter at our Radio EOD handles. But before we get to any of what I just mentioned, we always got to throw a curveball in there. Matt, Mary, let's start talking about COVID-19, this time from the angle of the University of Rochester Medical Center. There was reporting that came out earlier this week that the URMC gave, quote, preferential COVID-19 vaccine treatment to some of, quote, wealthy connected people to the University of Rochester. So there are allegations that the U of R invited at least 26 so-called well-connected individuals to get vaccinated at the U of R. The U of R is giving vaccines to its staff members. These so-called well-connected individuals are not staff members at the U of R. In cases that have been reported, they are wealthy donors or on the board of trustees, but they are not staff members and therefore would not fit into the U of R policy to be eligible to get vaccinated. Apparently, emails were sent to these individuals by one of the U of R's financial money raisers. Colleges have entire departments to raise money by reaching out to people. Apparently they were reached out to through those departments and invited to apply to get a vaccine. So in effect, this is giving preferential treatment to wealthy, well-connected people to the U of R, bypassing policy. Matt, Mary, did you hear about this story?
I did, and I also want to add that many of the staff members and people who are teaching at the U of R have not actually been able to receive vaccinations from the U of R at all, and haven't gotten this kind of, outreach of saying, we have these vaccines available, come get them, and have in fact been encouraged to seek elsewhere and to get the vaccines through New York State instead of through the university. So the idea of them reaching out to donors is unsurprising, because it's a money-making institution. But it is really disappointing to know that they reached out with the knowledge that they could not provide the vaccinations to people who would actually be teaching.
Yeah, it certainly is, disappointing is, I think, a generous way to put it, and an accurate one, though. We know that supply of COVID-19 vaccine does not meet the demand, and therefore not everyone who wants a vaccine is going to get one the moment they want it. Governor Cuomo at the state level has laid out various phases of people who can get vaccinated. Phase 1A was sort of all medical, frontline medical workers. And then the most recent phase is phase 1B. This includes other so-called essential workers, police officers, firefighters, teachers, university professors, folks like that. And of course, there's lots and lots of other folks who don't even qualify for getting the COVID-19 vaccine yet. Oh, I apologize. Yeah, phase 1B as well was also those age 65 or older, I believe. So that's a huge pool of people, regardless of profession, the elderly. So that's really big. So the idea is that you try to give the vaccine to those who need it the most.
Who are most vulnerable.
Yeah, who are most vulnerable. So based on either, possibility of getting infected through so-called essential professions, or those who are most elderly or in nursing homes. Ergo, those who are most vulnerable.
Jason, didn't URMC in its statement say that all of these donors that were vaccinated would have qualified under the existing sort of order? They were all people who were either over the age of 65 or had some sort of immunocompromised system.
Yeah, that's interesting, Matt. I think the U of R has tried to cover for itself, at least in the reporting I've seen, to say, look, these 26 people, although they're not affiliated with the U of R, as in they're not an employee and therefore under our policies would not be eligible to receive a vaccine, because we're only, according to our own policies, offering it to our own employees. Maybe these people weren't employees of the U of R, but hey, they were, 65 years old or older, and therefore, what's the harm if they get vaccinated? Now, it should be clear that I haven't seen specific reporting, because the U of R declined to provide this information, whether or not any of those 26 people who were invited, 26 at least that we know about, actually ended up getting vaccinated through the U of R. I'm not sure we know that at the point of this recording, but at least we know that they were invited to get vaccinated through this preferential system due to, well, let's be blunt about it, due to their money. Right, due to their power and money, and the U of R wants to keep having them donate money to the U of R, because as Mary, you said, the U of R is a money-making machine, as are so many other colleges, and well, all actually aspects of our society.
Yeah,
I do just want to read a quick snippet from the press release from Sarah Mangelsdorf, the president of the university's. What she published, just because it's kind of an interesting way of using the language. And she says, "We know that many of you are disappointed by this information, and rightly so. The notion of privileging some people over others to receive a potentially life-saving vaccine runs counter to our values. It undermines the hard work we are doing to support the health of everyone in our community during this pandemic." And I just am interested in the way that she talks about values in general, because obviously they want to save people's lives, but they're already, by encouraging staff to teach in person when it's not safe, by encouraging people to come onto campus because they need the money from students living on campus, like, their values are of making money. So offering a vaccine to people who give them money is actually very much in line with their values and not against it.
Matt, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say more generally, and sort of going off of what Mary just said, that when I was reading about this earlier this week, I sort of thought back to all the reporting that we've heard over the past year or so about how people in communities of color and also in impoverished communities, which do overlap, of course, are much more likely to die or suffer severe illness because of COVID, and also that these communities are also often being left behind when it comes to, or so far at least, in terms of receiving vaccinations. And the thing about that is that I think people see that, and there's sort of like this context or worldview that's constructed that suggests that, poor people, Black people, Latinx people are being left behind in this crisis. And the reality, of course, is no, these people are being left behind all the time, every day. And COVID is just another thing that's being piled on top of that.
Yeah, because we live in a society where having all forms of capital, whether it's social capital, human capital, actual capital in terms of money and assets, tends to get you farther in life. And for many, many reasons, minorities in this nation do not have access to the same amounts of capital than, for the most part, white and older folks do. And by the way, one of those reasons was institutionalized slavery for centuries in this country. The United States, I know the United States didn't formally exist until 1776 or whatever around there, but in terms of people being in what we now call the U.S., the U.S. has had slaves longer than it has not had slaves. And I think people don't realize that we only haven't had slaves, at least formally, for the past 150 years, whereas the U.S. has at least been around for 500 years, to some regard. So, and slavery has been here since at least 400 years. So it's important to remember that. And in terms of, Mary, you're saying how giving preferential treatment with vaccines maybe does or does not align with U of R's values. Yeah, I mean, I guess the point of talking about the story, and this gets to what you just said here, Matt, too, is I'm not surprised about this, right? We shouldn't be surprised. This stuff happens all the time. I'm sure I'm I'm sure it's happening with other institutions, whether it comes public or not, where those with more money and connections get access to resources. Because that's how the system
Absolutely.
works. It's logical. It's a
There
logic of
have
the
been
system.
other stories about that too.
Yeah.
Very recently about hospitals offering vaccines to their trustees. There are tons of stories that just, you were just talking about the racial disparities. Like, white people are getting vaccines way more than anyone else at the
Right.
moment. So yeah, it's absolutely not a surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. I should say too that I was very lucky enough myself to get vaccinated yesterday. I got my first shot of the Moderna vaccine. I was, as someone who works in education, I qualify under phase 1B of the aforementioned New York's plan, and was just very lucky enough after trying many days to get in. And I did receive my first shot, and can tell you that I've only grown an extra arm, and I can now see colors. I mean, I'm sorry, I can always see colors. That's not new. I can now see sounds, and my shoe size has shrunk by half. But other than that, man, I feel great. And COVID ain't got nothing on me. I'm
Yeah,
kidding.
you were my looker anyway.
Yeah, I'm kidding. I did get vaccinated. Very thankful to that, and I do hope that we are able to get more supply in this country, of course. And I hope that for those who are comfortable enough to get the vaccine are able to do so in a timely fashion that is based on some level of fairness and not towards simply those who have the most money or connections. That to me sounds pretty reasonable. Well, hey, we should remind folks that you're tuned into 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. This is Evidence of Design. We're talking this hour, looking locally at various political stories. Now we're going to transition to look at some of the top political stories in Rochester from just over the past year. Golly, there's a lot of them. We're going to end by talking about the most recent story of the Rochester Police Department handcuffing and pepper spraying a 9-year-old girl during a, I guess, so-called routine domestic dispute call. I'm still not sure exactly what the nature of the call was, but and it ended up in a way that clearly is not so great, and perhaps is further evidence of the need to rethink how mental health is cared for and responded to in this country, and how law enforcement and our justice system could change. So we're going to get there, but we have plenty of stories to begin with. And I actually want to start out by going back to the most recent, well, going back to the 2019 local elections. That feels like ages ago whenever you talk about anything that's more than a week in our political lives. But we'll have to remember that back in 2019, there was perhaps a surprise turnout where Adam Bello was elected to be the Monroe County executive. He's a Democrat. It was the first Monroe County executive who's a Democrat and a long time in Monroe County. And also the Democrats picked up 2 seats in the county legislature. There still ended up being the minority in the county legislature with 14 seats. Republicans maintained the majority with 15. So it was a big kind of year in Monroe County because of those elections and who everyone decided to vote for in them, and that Democrats got a lot more power. Coming out of that, though, did anyone remember the Cable Act? We actually did a show on this. I looked it up. It was like episode number 74 or something. We're now on episode 130. So it was a while ago. Do you remember?
I don't remember what we were talking about 5 minutes ago. So no, I don't remember that episode at all.
The Cable Act was proposed by Republicans in the county legislature after the November results in the election came in 2019. And the Cable Act stood for checks and balances for legislative equality. Who cares about the title? But ostensibly, it was to enhance the legislature's oversight and make it, more balance the powers between the executive and the legislative. So it would essentially curtail the Monroe County executive's authority to appoint people on his or her cabinet to pass and enact legislation, to get funding to where it needs to go. It would really hamstring the executive branch in support of the legislative branch.
I do now remember this because it reminds me of what they tried to do in Wisconsin after Scott Walker was voted out of office.
Tell us a little bit about that, Matt.
Oh, I don't know.
Well, remember, just give a brief back.
Is that Governor? I can't remember his name.
Yeah, was it Tony Evers?
Scott Walker was voted out of office, and he signed a bunch of last-ditch executive orders in order to extremely curtail the powers of his office, the governor's, in anticipation of being replaced by a Democrat.
Totally. That indeed reporting on the Republicans' efforts here to pass the Cable Act in 2019 was reportedly based off of some other more national Republican efforts, like the one you're mentioning, Matt, in Wisconsin with outgoing Governor Scott Walker, to effectively hamstring incoming Democratic office holders. So I want to play a brief clip that we actually played this way back in the episode when we covered the Cable Act, but oh man, this one's fun. This will be the then and now, I believe, Republican Monroe County legislative president, Joe Carbone, I believe, and also his assistant, Marionetti, I believe his name is, talking about why the Cable Act, why they did the Cable Act. Why would they do something like that? Let's listen.
Because we want to, we were voted in as the majority. The people kept us as the majority. We can't lose our teeth. We have to have some power to govern. If we let the whole thing go, then why should we be in the majority?
What about the appearance this is taking power away from the county executive?
This is not a power grab. This is just one more level of
it's transparency.
One more level of transparency.
And it's creating the co-equal branches. If I can expand just on what the president was saying.
This is just one more level of transparency in the fight to hold the radical left accountable.
Dude, if you ever run for office, or if you're ever an office holder, pro tip, just say it's about transparency. If there's ever a controversy, just say it's about being transparent, and people will smile, nod their heads, and be like, "Yes, I support transparency. Who wouldn't support transparency?"
This is why corporations hire PR teams, because these skin suits don't know how to talk to other people.
Because, well, I think they do know how to talk to other people. It's just that what they're trying to, fundamentally what they're trying to pass or enact or legislate is so morally and intellectually reprehensible to the common good that to actually say it for what it is sort of impossible, politically impossible. So they have to twist themselves into pretzels to make it seem palatable, or they don't even bother to do that, and they just come up with banal platitudes and fake political winners like freedom, jobs, choice, and transparency to get people on their side.
That moment when that guy just offers up transparency while his compatriot is stumbling for an answer is the most incredible thing I've ever seen in local politics. It's just you might as well have just said it's about freedom.
Totally.
He could have just said that, actually.
Oh yeah, that's the point, right? Is substitute transparency with other meaningless political word you want.
What we like to call glittering generalities in propaganda talk.
Love it, Mary. You can find out more about media literacy and propaganda by checking out our YouTube channel, Evidence of Design, because Mary did some great workshops on media literacy there. Thanks also with our, of course, host, 100.9 FM, WXAR, and a local grassroots radio branch of that, Reclaiming the Narrative. Revisiting the Cable Act brought back so much trauma, and it's just so funny to go back to that. Thankfully, it didn't end up getting passed. But this next thing that we're going to talk about did end up passing by the Republicans. Oh, I'm sorry. So it's one really quick thing, and this ties into what we're about to cover. So why this got so much question? The Cable Act, all inside baseball. We're talking about local politics. Who cares? Well, Republicans controlled the legislature for 3 decades in Monroe County, and the moment a Democratic county executive comes into power, they try to pass legislation that they said is good governance no matter what. It's not about who holds office, it's just good governance. Obviously that's hypocritical, right? How you can't be generous, like it's not about being generous to say, yeah, that makes sense. Like why they would try to restrict the power of the county executive when indeed the past county executives for decades have been Republicans. So it's just a power grab. It is what it, and it's not about transparency. It's just a power grab. Republicans are just being skinless. Anyways, this next thing that Republicans did pass, this was right after the 2019 election. It was the prohibited harassment of a police officer, peace officer, or first responder in Monroe County. Do you remember this? This was the police officer annoyance law that criminalized anyone's action to, quote, annoy, alarm, or threaten an officer. There was punishment from up to a year in jail and or a $5,000 fine.
I had totally forgotten the timeline on this and was absolutely astonished that it was pre-summer, actually.
Yep.
I remember there being actual police officers saying things like, yeah, it seems a bit redundant.
we already do that, right? We already arrest people for annoying. No, I'm just kidding.
Or kill them.
Well, dude, that's so true, because the funniest thing was like then police chief was it Laron Singletary?
Yep.
Yeah, then police chief Laron Singletary, even Mike Mazzeo, the president of the Locust Club, like one of the most conservative police unions I've seen, our local police union, the Locust Club, even they said like, we don't actually need this, guys. And so like everyone universally, even police officers, ended up saying, yeah, please don't pass this. It's not like legal and enforceable. I mean, how can we fine or arrest or threaten someone who, quote, annoys us,
Yeah, also, like, if we want to talk, like, we probably don't want to go down this rabbit hole right now, but if we want to talk about saving money for the county, like, putting people in jail for annoying a police officer would take so much taxpayer money to, like, house and feed them in prison. That's crazy.
Totally. And obviously, like, the question is, like, what does it mean to annoy a police officer, right? I mean, that could be, if our justice system and policing is tenuous as best right now, imagine what it would be like if you could be arrested, jailed, and fined for, quote, annoying a police officer. Would that be if you're the one videotaping George Floyd or Daniel Prude, are you then arrested because you were annoying the officer? I mean, it's just this whole can of worms that even officers thankfully recognized and said, no, we don't want that. Republicans, anyways, though, they went ahead and passed it. The Republican-led county legislature and then outgoing Monroe County executive Republican Cheryl Donalfo signed it into law. Thankfully, it was repealed in April 2020.
Yeah, it's a really good thing because of what comes next, actually.
Yes.
Well, I don't know. I think you guys are being a little hard on it. I think like it's really a shame that we don't get to watch like episodes of Judge Judy where people get fined a grand for the crime of petty nuisance.
We could just totally, Donald Trump comes in, starts his own reality TV of Rochester police annoyance law, and just there we go. We've got it all figured out. Folks, we're going to take a short break on Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. We've been talking this hour about some local stories. First of all, covering the URMC, the University of Rochester Medical Center, which offered for non-U of R employees to essentially jump the line and get COVID-19 vaccines. These were people who were so-called well connected to the U of R, meaning they gave the U of R a lot of money. And then we're going through just the last year plus a few months in Monroe County political history, covering some of the top stories. We're going to end with the most recent story on the RPD handcuffing and pepper spraying a 9-year-old girl, and we're going to sort of trace the line up to that moment, starting with the with the Monroe County Republicans trying to pass the Cable Act to restrict incoming Democratic County Executive Adam Bellows' powers, and also then Monroe County legislative Republicans passing a criminalizing so-called annoying police officers. We're going to get to more, including the long-standing fight of Monroe County Democrats over who should take over the commissioner of the Monroe County Democratic election seat of the Board of Elections in Monroe County. We'll be right back after a short break on 100.9 FM WXIR. Hang on. That was Mulberry Leaves by Sestrugi. Matt, that band's all right.
That's pretty good. Pretty good.
Do you know who's in Sestrugi?
No idea.
Yeah. That's Matt's band. It's good stuff. They also do our intro and outro music. Let's get back to it, though, on Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXAR. Let's cover some more local stories from the past year in Monroe County politics. Do you folks remember all of the articles and infighting among Democrats over who should take over the Board of Elections commissioner position?
I remember that they split into separate caucuses, if I'm not mistaken. Could you call them caucuses?
Yeah, why not? Indeed, that split in the Monroe County Democrats exists still to this day along similar lines. It's so odd, and this is kind of why we're covering this, because I have found it nigh inscrutable to understand local politics. I just don't get it. You know, part of that is because local reporting is eviscerated in this country. In Rochester, we have the DNC, WXXI. The city newspaper is now run by WXXI. There's the Minority Reporter. You know, there's a handful of news organizations that cover politics, and it's just like I just find it completely inscrutable. In this instance, the Board of Elections, as happens in most places, has two supposedly non-partisan commissioners, one Republican, one Democrat. The Democrats had a vacancy in their election commissionership for a long time. It was filled by Lasana Booth. She was an acting commissioner. She was a favorite of Mayor Lovely Warren. And then when it came time to formally vote on and appoint and approve the next commissioner, Lasana Booth actually didn't want the job. She's like, no thanks. And so she withdrew from consideration. But Mayor Lovely Warren and then Democratic County Legislative Minority Leader Vince Felder, along with some other of a breakaway Democratic caucus, such as Ernest Flagler Mitchell, among others, still threw their support besides Lasana Booth. Very confusing for a long time. The post was unfilled. There was bickering. Mind you, this was all happening in the midst of leading up to the 2020 general election. You know, the most important general election in generations. Not only because who was on the ballot, but also because of the events around it. You know, COVID-19 is in full swing. We're doing absentee voting, early voting, you know, worried about catching the pandemic while you're going to vote. So in all of that, Democrats can't decide on who fills this sort of functionary political job. Ended up being that Jackie Ortiz, she was a city council member. She ended up being voted on and appointed to the position, but she wasn't recognized by Democratic majority leader in the county legislature, Vince Felder. He didn't recognize the appointment. He's like, this is illegitimate. We don't recognize Jackie Ortiz. We don't want her there, even though she's a fellow Democrat, and some of his Democratic fellow members, well, enough of them voted to appoint her. So a weird split going on in the Democratic Party, and it still continues to this day. I still don't quite know what's going on with that.
What is it with this year and people not recognizing elections?
Yeah, I don't know. I think
something fishy going on.
If only
it's almost like our systems are broken.
I wish we had the same sort of scrutiny and awareness to money. You know, how like people all of a sudden are realizing, like, you know, I know we've been pretending that votes matter. I don't know if I care to pretend that anymore. You know, we still sort of pretend money matters though. And man, if only we could recognize elections and not recognize money to some extent, but we'll get there. But hey, before we go on to some other stories about the Monroe County Democrat infighting, we got to cover Daniel Prude. That we all know, of course, the story where Daniel Prude, an unarmed black man who came to Rochester, he was killed last March by the RPD. The autopsy, the medical examiner said that he was killed in a setting of asphyxiation, in the setting of physical strength. That's a fancy way of saying he was choked to death by the RPD. And despite that, internal police investigation and the local police union, the Locust Club, said the officers' actions were consistent with their training and therefore nothing was wrong.
Well, they were wrong, actually, because a lot of things were wrong, and that kicked off months and months of protests.
Yeah, which certainly still continues to this day, not only locally, but nationally, in response to the killing of George Floyd and so many others unarmed, but even armed, you know, black men and women in this country. Because I thought that the point of the Second Amendment, if you want to go there from the conservative angle, was like, nothing wrong with being armed, you know, to be armed all day. And so, you know, whether you're armed or unarmed, loved arms, you know, I got 3 of them now because of the vaccine. But, you know, just like it's just so often with these stories, though, why we keep saying unarmed is because it's just so often that it's unarmed people of color are being killed. And now this will, of course, connect back to the most recent story of the RPD handcuffing and pepper spraying a 9-year-old girl. And still major questions remain about the RPD and indeed even Mayor Lovely Warren's response to and knowledge of the events surrounding Daniel Prude's killing. And there are still many people calling for her resignation, if not outright changes, you know, substantive changes to policing in Rochester.
So I've been I got a take on this that I think is a little fresh, perhaps. Not something you hear every day. So we all saw how that story made national headlines and everything. You know, police officers pepper spray 9-year-old girl during a domestic house call. It reads like an Onion article headline from like 2014. So I've been watching a lot of samurai films lately. And the samurai, for those of you who didn't know, they had a method of saving face whenever they did something dishonorable. You know, they forgot to take their sandals off when they entered somebody's house, or they accidentally sneezed on their lord or something. And that method of saving face was a form of ritual suicide called seppuku. Now, seppuku was a very painful way to die. It involved disemboweling yourself. Literally, the samurai would stab himself with a sword and drag it across his abdomen before another samurai would cut off his head. And it was important that it was gruesome and horrible because it was a vehicle for reclaiming lost honor. The samurai had committed an offense. It had to be atoned for with a painful death. Now, like our modern police, there was a cultural expectation for samurai to embrace certain virtues and values and set an example for the rest of society as a whole to model. And whenever there's a story like this where a police officer makes national headlines for brutalizing a black person, we don't usually see a lot of discussion on the left about the humiliation these officers must feel for shaming the uniform.
Yeah, and the consequences so often not had in the justice system, where police officers time and time again get off from these incidents of, if not outright killing unarmed Black people who did not pose an imminent danger to their lives, then, you know, at least hurting them or infringing them or dehumanizing them. So often there are not consequences to be had. And police officers, when they, you know, it's a job, right? You go online, you say, oh, they're hiring to be a police officer. I'm going to apply. Here's my resume and cover letter. Great. They accepted that. Now I go to like the police academy and I train for less than a year. Great. I passed the police academy. Now I'm and I go through a bunch of other training. Now I'm a sworn officer. I wear a badge and I exist to so-called protect and serve. It's still a job. You know, you put on your badge and uniform and you do your job, but it's a very public job, and with great power comes great responsibility. And I don't revel in the idea of punishing people. I don't revel in the idea of stripping people of their income in a society where income means life and death. But I do, Matt, think about what you're getting at in terms of like this larger cultural theme of humiliation or recompense for what the office should stand for or hold. You know, not even just the office of what it means to be a police officer, but the office of a public servant at large. You know, police officers make money through taxpayers. We all pay for the police officers. And also as a human being, we should do better, all of us, including myself and this radio show, and you know, you, the listener, of modeling behavior that we would be proud of, you know, for our future generations and for each other. And we should treat other people the way we want to be treated. And that's not meant to be mushy gushy soft stuff. It's meant to say we lack adequate responses to these horrible events in society. Not only do they tend to not be adequately completed in our justice system, meaning police officers often are going unaccounted. You know, they're not being held accountable at all in any manner in the justice system through juries or internal investigations. But even beyond that, there's no sort of, we don't see the people who've done these things. We get the same vapid political statements from leaders, and it's just sort of, it's hard. You know, it's re-traumatizing every single time we see these things, and we come to lose trust in each other and our institutions, and we need some form of healing to get over this, right? And that healing could be doled out through the justice system as it currently stands. It could be people themselves taking on more public accountability for their actions, or it could be, I think this is what most people would get to, is structural reform of these systems that would allow so many of these problems to occur in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole sort of rallying cry for the last year or so now, nearly a year anyway, has been to abolish the police. And that kind of like idea, I think, cannot exist. It's completely anathema to a capitalist system. I mean, do you guys remember when a bunch of city council members for Minneapolis held like a press conference where they vowed to defund the police and radically rethink policing in their city? I
do. And then they kind of backed away from that, right?
They totally backed away from that just a few months later. And like all of the sort of, there's so much, there's been so much reporting on just sort of the resistance to any sort of real or substantive or revolutionary thinking when it comes to changing the way we police in our society. And that's because, as many people have noted, the institution of the police was created to protect property. That's its main function. And so long as we have a conception of personal property in a capitalist system, there will be a need for police. And so If we're not going to get rid of capitalism, we're probably not going to get rid of police. And I guess if we're stuck with capitalism and we're stuck with police, then I guess put me in the pro-punitive part of we should punish police officers who do things like this.
Yeah, just to remind folks who tuned into Evidence of Design on 100.9 WXIR in Rochester. I know we're not getting to some of the other top stories in Rochester, but that's fine. Let's keep covering the most recent story of the RPD handcuffing and pepper spraying a 9-year-old girl. Matt, I'm not sure. Well, no, I don't necessarily agree that we should be on the punitive side. I guess so. Did you watch the video, Matt or Mary? It's around 6-minute video of the police cam of this incident.
I didn't.
Nor did I.
Okay, so I would, it's certainly hard to watch, as all these videos are. I would recommend watching it because I was struck. Let me just be honest here. I'm biased against police violence, and so I tend to be skeptical of policing as an institution because the fundamental role of police, is the way I see it, is to protect private property in an unjust capitalist system. And therefore, if police are protecting an unjust system, then they are part of the problem. I'm not saying all police are bad. Indeed, I'm happy that we have a section of society that can take responsibility and executive force when we need it to counteract things that are hopefully universally deemed problematic. However, in watching the video of the body cam that was released, it's like I still couldn't really figure out, and I'm sure this is out there in more of the public statements, and I'm sure there's people who are listening right now who know way more than I do, and I should know more. But I'm still trying to figure out what the police were called to the victim's house to begin with. Apparently it was sort of a domestic call. There was some sort of strife going on. And so you hear about that's the reason why they're called there, but then the footage just starts with 2 police officers sort of holding the 9-year-old girl by each arm and just sort of trying to wrestle her into the police car as she's screaming 100 times throughout the video that she wants her father. And the police officers, this doesn't look great. The optics are bad, and it doesn't look fun. But the police officers did try to say, please get in the car. At one time, when the young girl actually got into the police car, there was 2 males kind of wrestling her into the car, and then a female police officer comes over. I believe she's the one who actually pepper sprayed her, but it's hard to tell. She adopts a much different tone. She's very gentle with her and asking, please let's calm down. And she's the first one in this video who actually responds to the repeated calls of the 9-year-old girl, who just says, I want my dad, I want my dad, I want my dad. She's the first person in the scene of 9 police officers there or so to actually say that I could hear, at least, I will try to find your dad, right? She's the first one to say that. So it certainly would have been great if other police officers could have said something to that regard besides just saying, get in the car, calm down, stop it, you're acting like a child, stuff like that. Not very helpful, right? But so I was struck by the at times efforts of humanity and efforts of being calm and caring in some regard for this poor girl who's obviously struggling. At the same time, so long story short, I was wondering what is happening? What is the goal of what is happening here? Because again, this is without the context. I think the old saying that with every, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? The police are trained to just if someone's acting out, you need to separate them and get them in the back of a police car. You handcuff them, you get in the back of the car. And I think that is what they saw the situation of. This girl needs to be controlled. And so we will handcuff her and put her in the back of our car. I was just wondering, why is this happening at all? What is the solution going to be here? And it just made me question the institution of policing in that regard. I'm just wondering what was supposed to be happening here? And I'm leaving watching that video and from the reports recognizing that whatever was supposed to be happening wasn't.
Well, question there too is who do you expect to arrive when you call 911? Do you expect the police to arrive? Do you expect a social worker to come? Like having, I mean, that's obviously taking a different approach here, but that is one of the questions that has been posed so much by the defund movement, is who is responding to these 911 calls, and how can we change that to make the response more appropriate to what's going on?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Mary, and that's where I think we could do some structural reforms to better triage support and resources to our fellow human beings who need it. And, you know, I guess if you call 911 now, you're going to get an ambulance if it's a medical emergency. You're going to get a fire truck if it's a fire, but you're also going to get a police officer in that event. And then you're going to get a police officer for anything else, right?
I read in the article you sent me, Jason, that the police were called because the girl was making threats against the life of one of her parents and against her own life. You know, if somebody, if anyone is making those kinds of threats, you generally have to take them. You have to take them not generally. You have to take them seriously, especially if they're threatening themselves. And in that instance, who else can you call?
Right.
We have one emergency number.
Totally.
I think you can call 211 for mental health crises.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. To be fair, the Monroe County Legislature, I think, or the city or the mayor, there is some new crisis support hotline that sends social workers or mental health professionals out. It's like, I believe, brand new in Rochester. Again, other people know about this more than I do, but that I believe is sort of relatively brand new. But again, still calling 911, I think, for the day-to-day activities here, you're going to get a police officer, to my knowledge. Anyways, we are drastically running out of time here on Evidence of Design at 100.9 FM WXIR.
I think one conclusion we can come to is don't pepper spray 9-year-olds.
Certainly. Yeah. So, right. That's where we were going, is to say that there are people proposing, local leaders proposing to ban handcuffing minors and also banning the use of chemical irritants on minors. Certainly that seemed like gross abuse of power. But we didn't get to some other stories here of Mayor Lovely Warren's response to City Council member Malik Evans running against her and her sort of bizarre response against a political challenger of her same party. We covered that a few episodes ago. Nor did we get to the other very big story locally of County Legislature Ernest Flagler Mitchell sending a unsolicited nude photo of a part of his body to a young 19-year-old woman. It's a long story. I'm sure if you are in Rochester following the news, you've seen that. And Flagler Mitchell is, of course, tied into all these other stories about the Democratic infighting over the Democratic Election Commissioner. Also we didn't even get to the 2021 budget and the last minute amendments the county legislator put in about establishing a so-called slush fund. So much was going on in local politics and continues. This is just over the last year. It's really quite bizarre, and to stay on top of it all is challenging. Hey, we got to end our show here, though, 100.9 FM WXIR. Thank you for tuning in. You can always find our past episodes on YouTube by searching for the Evidence of Design YouTube channel, and you can also get in touch with us on Facebook and Twitter at our Radio EOD handles. I was your host, Jason Taylor, joined by my good friends and co-hosts, Matt Treadwell.
So long.
And Mary Lawrence.
Be well.
Until next time, folks, be well out there. Be safe, all right? Take care, and bye-bye.